Hello and welcome to today's episode of Served by SHFM, your food service hospitality podcast. The Society for Hospitality and Food Service Management is a community of like-minded professionals seeking educational, developmental, and networking opportunities to enrich their personal and professional goals. Hello and welcome back to Served by SHFM, your food service hospitality podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Michael Moore.
I'm Danny P.
And in today's episode, we're talking about the power of deliberate decision-making and how individuals and corporations can make choices that positively impact their communities and employees.
And today we're joined by Selena Cup, president of Sodexo Magic, co-founder of the Heritage Link brands, a previous BE Next Entrepreneur of the Year, along with many awards, and probably our first guest with a Wikipedia page. Thank you so much for joining us today, Selena.
Yes.
You, Danielle and Michael.
I feel like that's a milestone for us. We have somebody on the show.
I mean,
with
we
a
have
Wikipedia page.
Yeah, and we have our 3 billion listeners.
That's true. Probably more, I would say. I think we're higher.
Way
than
more.
That now.
Yeah.
Yes. I think today I'm especially excited about today because one of the themes that we've been talking about recently, and I use this word a lot because I think it needs to be said, is advocacy. Mm-hmm. And talking about how corporations and individuals can have just a positive impact, not only on their bottom line, but on all the people around them that support them, bring them up, as well as the company. I think that's an important topic that we haven't addressed yet specifically. And so, I'm happy that we have someone so passionate about it to talk today. And, Selena, as anyone that's listened to our podcast knows, before we speak with guests, we think it's really important to get to understand them and their journey. We try to always have someone, and we found out very quickly that everybody has a very interesting and unique background. And you are very accomplished. You have so much going on that I think we could spend days exploring, but having the chance to connect with you a little bit last year really opened up my eyes to some of the things that you've done. Can you tell us a little bit about, yourself early on, your early jobs, that kind of influenced your career path?
Yeah. And thank you again for having me on the show. It's a topic actually that I'm passionate about. And I think in retrospect, looking at even before my career started, I was a cheerleader. And cheerleaders are advocates of a lot of stuff, right? A lot of different sports, trying to get people's energy level up so we can help encourage our teams to win. And so I think at the core, I didn't know that was a thing, but I actually enjoy rooting for businesses and people, and especially the underdogs, because I feel like the capitalist in me, and I use that word very, very lightly, is all about wanting to win and achieve the greatest value. And if you can get the underdog to win in Vegas, you really get paid. So that is me at the core. But when I think about my early career, it was absolutely shaped by growing up in a single parent household where I had a mom who cared dearly about me, poured into me immensely, and did the very best that she could, despite not having a college degree and having me as her fifth of 5 children by, under very, very challenging circumstances. And so her experience and journey was mine by default. And I think very early on, she taught me to focus on getting good grades and a great education, because education is the key to freedom. And that narrative was always instilled because I constantly asked the question of, gosh, why do you look so sad working your job? You don't look like you enjoy it. Why don't you just quit the job? And her response was like, I wish I could, but I can't. You go get your education so that you can have more options. And if you have the means to quit, then you go quit. And so that really took me on a journey to want to get good grades so that I could go to a good school. And believe it or not, I knew at the age of 7 that I wanted to go to Stanford. And so that, again, that installation from her encouraged me to really always want the best because I could see it always in my purview, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. I'm always amazed when people tell stories and they're like, I had this determination to do this thing when I was 7. I'm like, I just appreciate that and admire it so much because you see such excellence and talent come from that drive and determination. You have your eyes set on that goal and can continue to pursue it, even if you're not always making a step towards it.
For sure. And Danielle, it's interesting that you should say that because when I think about key moments in my life where I have pivoted or made decisions to go after something, like who just goes after Stanford at 7, right? For me, it was really rooted in heartbreak a little bit. And when I think about the decisions that have influenced me living my purpose, it in some ways has come as a result of trauma in some ways. So for example, in 2nd grade, my mother really wanted me to go to this private school, but you had to take a special achievement test, the Stanford achievement test. And my best friend and I both applied. I got into the school. She didn't. And I was devastated because I didn't know how, what if none of the other kids liked me? This was my very best friend that I did everything with if I had free time. And so that was what first introduced me to Stanford and me then whipping out my encyclopedia, if anybody remembers those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
To learn more about the school and see wow, this place is special. I'm curious to learn more. And oh, by the way, while I'm there, I want to figure out ways to learn a lot so that I can earn money so I can take care of my family, right? That was kind of the mindset for sure. And so I went to school initially thinking I was going to be an economics major. Because to me, that was the closest thing to money. But then I realized, number one, this feels, and no disrespect to the econ majors out there, but this was just so boring. I felt like there was so much more that I wanted to learn about history and politics and sociology, all of it. And so I then chose an interdisciplinary major in international relations that allowed me to figure out how the world worked and what made some countries and people have power and others not. And so that coupled with choosing very early through internships, a career in banking, starting with consumer banking, then moving to commercial and then foreign exchange to then land on Wall Street to do corporate finance and Latin American banking. Again, rooted in this notion of wanting to have options and be able to financially learn from my mother's lessons and hope for better, not just for myself, but for my family. And so career-wise, I did all of that in college, but my real job out of college, my first real banking job, within a week, I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. I feel like I'm just making rich people richer. This doesn't feel right. And even culturally, my manager actually was a Black woman who I still stay in touch with, but the entire environment was very, very homogenous white male. And I didn't realize it at the time, but my ability to even walk and communicate in this space always felt a little bit uncomfortable. And I didn't realize it at the time, but these emotions were driving me to look for other things to do that more closely aligned with my passion. And when I think about how did I know to even think or do that? It was again in the pain of working in this job, but during my lunch breaks, I would go into the bathroom and bawl my eyes out because it didn't feel right. And so for some reason in those moments, I have these epiphanies around what I should be doing. And in that moment in my early 20s, it was like, you know what? You are an international relations major. You love thinking about how people trade with one another. You should just apply in any realm that gives you that experience. And so lo and behold, flipping through an LA Times newspaper, like the physical paper ones, I saw an ad for a sales rep at United Airlines. And I was like, I can do that. I can work for an airline. And then when I read up on the types of benefits, it was like a slam dunk. I had to have this job. And so that literally, working for the airline, first as a salesperson and then as business development manager, that took me on a journey across the globe. I probably hit up 30 countries in that job just on the weekends, flying places like Sydney, Australia, or Buenos Aires to take a tango lesson. And so,
wow,
that's awesome.
Pretty incredible.
And was that where a lot of your background and a lot of your history is so rooted in international, travel and exploring the world? Did that come from your position at United Airlines, or did that just kind of unlock something or an opportunity rather that you've always hoped for?
Oh, that's a really good question. It actually comes from my childhood in that my father passed away before my second birthday, and his profession was, he had many professions in his young life. He actually died before his 45th birthday, but he attended Tuskegee University and was a Tuskegee Airman, and then went to medical school at the University of Kansas and graduated number 2 in his class as the only Black person in his class. So he then came out to LA to do his fellowship, which is how he ended up meeting my mom. And so I always had that legacy in the background, so to speak, that influenced me. But to answer your question,
wow,
his office manager, who was also a nurse, when he passed away, became my babysitter or nanny of sorts, and she was from Panama. So at a very early age, from probably 2, I learned how to speak Spanish. And so my lens was always open to the world because of it.
Wow.
I was going to ask Selena too, with all of the international travel and experiences that you've cultivated over the course of your career, I'm always curious to know what other languages people speak, because I also think that just from a linguistic standpoint, it really changes how you think about problems because of the way that language shapes how you perceive the world.
Yeah, for sure. So, obviously English is the language that I speak the easiest.
I'm still working on mine.
Spanish for sure, Portuguese, and then my travels to South Africa have me picking up various words. I cannot say that I speak the language, but I can, say good morning in Afrikaans, or, I can, dibble and dabble here and there, depending on where I go. And it's funny because my husband and I, we got married technically in Massachusetts, but we really had our formal ceremony with just the 2 of us in Egypt. And so we picked up different sayings here and there just to try to not look like tourists, or at least act like we were trying to keep up.
Yeah.
Wow. And so in this, we talk about how important it's been for you to kind of get out and explore the world and understand. It seems like understand business from such a global context. How did that lead to your involvement in Heritage Link Brands and starting that, and then Seven Sisters Winery from there? Because that's an interesting story.
Yeah. So, in 2005, it was a pretty incredible year for me because I got married, I started a business, and I got pregnant all in the same year.
That's a lot.
That's a big year.
That's a big year.
But when I think about how I came to Heritage Link Brands, it really was as the result of, again, these moments where, not to say I'm always traumatized, because that makes me sound like such a dark person, but when I worked at P&G right after business school, I loved, and still love Procter & Gamble. It's one of my favorite companies that I admire. But at the time, they owned a brand called Pringles. And I
might have heard of them.
Unaware. No, news to me.
And I've always had this love for food, like throughout my life. Like I've been on a journey to eat lots of it, eat different food and experience great food, wine, all of it, beverage. And so in this moment, when I was living in Massachusetts, having graduated from business school, having been conflicted about working for a company I like, but not really aligning to the brand, which by the way, they have since divested Pringles. So shout out to P&G. But feeling like I have this passion for food and love for food, but I want it to feel like it's purpose driven. So perhaps if I had been on, the pure water brand, I'd still be, at P&G. And so in that moment, my husband had proposed and I knew that I wanted to move back to Massachusetts, which is where he was embarking upon his graduate degree or his graduate career. And I had found this amazing job, again, in the international realm, helping young people, whether as students or for work internships or externships, either come to the US or study abroad on visas. And we would issue visas on behalf of the Department of State for roughly 50,000 young people a year. And so that job took me to 15 more countries that I had never been to with United, all in the spirit of promoting cultural understanding and thematically a post 9/11 world. So imagine, I've just left Cincinnati, Ohio. I moved in with my fiance, now husband of 17 years. And I'm feeling like I can take on the world because I get to travel to show people that America's a really neat place and Americans wanting to study abroad, go see the world, right? Speaking from an international relations major. And when I was probably about 4 months into that gig, I started looking at the data to understand where we were sourcing these young people from. And of the 50,000 people, less than 50 were coming from the entire continent of Africa. Now, global organization recruiting students, 50,000, but none come from this continent that have 54 countries. And so I told my boss at the time, an amazing leader, Stephen Truboff, who was the CEO of the Council on International Educational Exchange, we need to go into the continent because recently, in the context of that time period, there had been the U.S. embassy being bombed. Al-Qaeda was starting to set up shop on western parts of the continent. And just out of sure advocacy for this really being a global organization, we need to be bringing people from everywhere. And he was like, oh, that's a good idea, Selena. And so South Africa became the market that we piloted with because I thought it had so much commonality culturally with the United States, whether you look at the migration pattern of Europeans coming in the 16 and 1700s to, apartheid and slavery, and the fact that their wine region was really started from slaves, planting. And so while I was in South Africa opening up this market, traveling from the beautiful, gorgeous Cape Town all the way to the sizzly, sexy beaches of Durban, I would meet these incredible people and have this incredible food and wine. Sorry for using incredible so much, but it's the only thing I can
If it's the word that works, it works.
South Africa. South Africa is an incredible nation. And on my very last day in the country, again, flipping through a newspaper, the Sun Times, I saw this ad for the first annual Soweto Wine Festival. And in high school, I remember reading about Soweto, as we had social justice curriculum and talking about Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela and apartheid. And I thought, oh, wow, this is very different to think about Soweto in the context of wine. Hell yeah, I am headed there. And so I remember going to the concierge at the hotel that I was staying at to get directions, because this is before Waze, this is before, Uber and all of that. And he was like, oh, you must be mad. You cannot go to Soweto. It's dangerous. They're going to carjack you. I don't recommend it. And I was like, I feel like wine festivals aren't attracting that type of crowd. So I'm going to take chances. And when I was there, I literally had a chance to meet some of the very first producers, Black wine producers, who had either amassed enough capital to acquire vineyard land, which I don't care where you are on the planet, it is the most expensive real estate, or they began to really, apply a contract manufacturing model to produce wine brands that matched profiles that they were trying to capture with their, respective prime prospects. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, these wines are amazing. I mean, they tasted so great. And as a consumer, I just wanted to know where I could purchase the wines. And I stayed at the booth of Vivian Kleinhans, who is the fourth born of the seven sisters. And I literally stalked her. I was like, I need this in my life back in Massachusetts. Where can I get this? And she was like, look, we're struggling to get distribution in South Africa, let alone the United States. Like, she laughed at me. She was like, we've got a $3 billion wine industry, but distribution and ownership by Black South Africans, even though they are 90% of the population, is less than 2%. And I remember thinking like, ta-da, this is the idea that I was meant to market. And maybe this is why I went to P&G and learned how to do food and beverage marketing to help tell this story. And I remember going back to the hotel and calling my husband, who was like studying for finals or something. And I was like, sweetie, I found the perfect entrepreneurial opportunity for us to pursue. And, I chalk it up to him, being in love as a newlywed. But he was like, yes, baby, we can do whatever you want to do.
Just smart. That's all.
The right answer.
This is a happy marriage, I guess.
Yeah.
And so it was in that moment and that experience that I got his buy-in, and we literally a month later, in October of 2005, founded Heritage Link Brands from a dorm room in Massachusetts.
That's exciting stuff.
Yeah, when you get done with every story, I have 30 questions I want to ask, but I know we also need to move forward with, your career just has so much that we could explore. I don't know. Let's wait for the book maybe, because I feel like you need a book at some point. And if it hasn't happened, let's make it happen, because wow.
Or maybe I need to stop talking so long. Maybe I'm just...
No,
or we could have you back for another episode.
Yeah. I love that idea. Well, so how did, you found your passion, you found a way to marry your background in food and beverage marketing into making something that seemed insurmountable, i.e., distributing wine on such a global scale and making it feasible? How did that lead you to Sodexo Magic? And did that experience impact your career and shift it into a different direction?
Serendipitously, it's all been along the same journey, in that we started the business in 2005. And like I told you, I got pregnant and boohooed. And for a year and a half to 2 years, we just did market research because I was determined to be able to drink me some wine. No, but in all seriousness, in commercializing anything, there needs to be quantitative and qualitative analysis and research, and we wanted to make sure to get it right. And so we launched in 2007, first in the state of Massachusetts with Whole Foods as a customer. And then by the end of that year, we had gotten such an extraordinary amount of support, press, and coincidentally, the wine industry was at a point of innovation, in that the various states started allowing online shipping. And so that was a major catalyst in our growth and our distribution. But the very next year, in 2008, we began to supply wine through our distributor to Sodexo North America. Now, for those that may not be as familiar with Sodexo, it is a multinational company that is based in a suburb of Paris that is owned by the Boulogne family. And they operate in 70 countries, but the United States is its largest market. And it is known for providing the very best of quality of life services, from food service to that you might find in your school cafeteria, to cool retail concepts on a university campus, to patient dining in a hospital, or your pantry or cafes in your workplace. And so in 2008, Heritage Link Brands began supplying wine through our distributor to Sodexo's airline lounges segment. And we, at the time, were flying some really amazing wines, the very first South African wines, regardless of race, on American Airlines. And so we were supplying to the Admirals Club, and for Delta Airlines, to Sky Club, and to the Red Carpet Club for United. And so that relationship was an important one for us, because we, as part of our marketing plans, would have some of our wine producers come into the clubs and do little personal tastings for, people flying at first in international business. And so coincidentally, that same year, American Airlines asked me to do a wine tasting at one of their employee business resource group conferences. It was the African American Resource Groups Conference. And Mr. Irvin Magic Johnson was the keynote of this event. And so that was 14 years ago? Who knew that it would come full circle? But there was always for Heritage Link Brands a desire for wine to be the medium through which people reimagined excellence, Black excellence, on a global scale. And with Sodexo Magic, this joint venture, which was founded in 2006, so literally the year after Heritage Link Brands was founded, and it was really created to bring to bear the very best of operational excellence that Sodexo provides, with the community impact that my boss, Magic, Mr. Johnson, as I call him, brings to our society. I think a lot about how lucky I am. I feel blessed to not only be an entrepreneur and have a boss who's, he's got ownership in a whole bunch of different things, right? But I saw in him a leader at a very young age. 5, actually. I was in kindergarten when the Lakers won the first championship with him as Rookie of the Year, right? And then to see over the course of 5 more championships, and then an announcement that the world never expected when he came out to tell the world that he was diagnosed with HIV, to see him not only survive, but thrive, in the sense that when he retired, dedicated his business career to advancing opportunities for all, literally. And I happened to live in the neighborhood where he opened up the very first Magic Johnson Theater, when at that time there was a lot of concern about putting good things in urban neighborhoods, but out of fear that it would all get messed up. And he proved that to be an extraordinarily profitable business. I also happened to live in the neighborhood where he opened up the first Starbucks. And so at a very early age, I saw this Black excellence that I thought, wow, if my focus with Heritage, and now with us having a management team, a board that could support its growth and do well without me, if I can work through this venture, Sodexo Magic, that provides quality of life services to all types of communities, if I could put my entrepreneurial vision and work within the existing mission to have impact on a scale that is hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, then imagine how many more diverse businesses, diverse suppliers that I can advocate for in the process. Not just the producers in South Africa, not just my little small business, but those of so many more small and mid-cap companies that have excellent products and services that people just aren't aware of.
That's fantastic. And I really appreciate you, and I know Mike does too, sharing all of this with us, Selena, because it really helps shape and helps us pivot into the next questions that we have, because we can see this through line of community and impact. It's something that's just continuous throughout the course of your career. So I wanted to dive into talking about the impact decisions on both individual and a corporate level that those decisions can have on our communities. And obviously that's a lot to unpack in a single statement. So let's start it off with one question, which is, what kind of decisions made on a corporate level are impacting the communities around them?
Wow. I think procurement decisions absolutely affect the community around them. And either the choice to be intentional or to not be intentional about where you purchase the goods and services within your community from. I think a lot about our current state of affairs, right? So one piece of data that I think about on a daily basis, and I think about a lot, largely because my mindset is now shaped as the mother of an elementary school student, of a middle school student, and a high school student. And so these three little people, they keep me on my toes, and they are constantly amazing me with their ideas around what they want to do and how the world should look. And one of the biggest challenges that I think I face looking at them is this statistic around equity in our country, and the fact that we are such a wealthy society, the United States of America, but we have such a drastic gap between the haves and the have-nots. And classism is very, very pronounced here. And in our country, it ties very, very closely to race for all of the obvious reasons, right? Because you do have a population who, for 10 to 12 generations, was not legally allowed to develop and create generational wealth. And so the statistic that I think about a lot is that it is estimated, and this is per the investment bank Credit Suisse and Brandeis University doing a study back in, I think, 2016 or 2017. It will take 226 years for the average Black household to have parity with the average white household. Not the top, not the elite, but just the average. 226 years, because there's still such a gap in land ownership, in salaries of employees, and then also business ownership, the revenues that are being generated and the then subsequent opportunities that are being spread in the communities that are populated by Black people. And again, the way that I think about advocacy is twofold. Number one, it is for the most underserved, the most vulnerable population in our country. It happens to be Black people and Native Americans. And so when I think about the world and the lens of how things get done, I think about the role that corporations can play in both thinking through their buying decisions, whether it's who's your accounting firm, because you have to have an accounting firm, or maybe you have multiple ones, or maybe your business revenue is at a certain level where you use a fraction of an accounting person or a fraction of a CFO. Could you be intentional about how you spend your money so that you're actually closing that wealth gap? Thinking through employees, even. There's a lot of talk that I hear, not at Sodexo or at Magic Johnson Enterprises, because I think and I am in a very privileged position, and I can recognize my entitlement, but I'm in a very privileged position because my two parent partners get it. Like 2006 was long before 2020 when this racial reckoning happened, right? Like for Sodexo, this European company, to have the vision to create a joint venture with Mr. Johnson, like that is at the forefront. Obviously, he cares about impact. There are 30 some odd businesses that I'm sure he's involved in. And you can't even quote me on the number. He's always, I mean, his work ethic is the hardest in this office, right? And shout out to my virtual background. I know this doesn't look like where I am today. But, you know, it's really their examples that allow for me to even share these examples with you today. You know, there's a corporation that might be looking at hiring a lobbyist as they go out to advocate for whatever things they feel will advance the growth of their revenue. Consider hiring a woman or someone who's diverse to have your unique impact within the realm of power that you control within your ecosystem.
I think yeah, go ahead, Danny.
Oh, I think that's a really great point too, is that it's not just empowering corporate leadership, but it's all the hiring managers downstream, that you can be that advocate, you can make that impact just approaching it from a conscious mind.
Yes. And you know, what stuck out to me the most was that at the corporate level, being an advocate for these types of things doesn't mean that it's impacting the bottom line of the company in any adverse way. And in most ways, it's probably improving it, because you're finding talent that maybe has traditionally been overlooked or unrecognized. And it's creating instead of taking away something, it's creating new opportunities to get different lines of thought involved and different leadership styles that are equally and differently amazing. But like you touched on, you know, if they didn't take the time to be cognizant of it and think very deeply about their decisions and how they impact others, would maybe never happen.
Absolutely. But I also want to be mindful of the fact that doing this is not always easy, right? And I make it sound easy because I've got the support of two very prominent corporations that operate on a global scale that care about this work and care about closing that gap. Like, that's powerful. But they're in the business of quality of life. If you're a middle manager who's, you know, got 1,000 emails in your inbox and you've got real performance objectives that you've got to hit in order to get your bonus, it's going to require oftentimes inspiration from the top, meaning this can't just be your journey to be on and your fight to fight by yourself, but there has to be advocacy, there has to be energy, fuel towards wanting to do this that's coming from the top down. And I'm not saying that the top down makes it implemented so easily either. Obviously, you need a team that cares about getting this work done, but it's a whole lot easier to make it happen if I get measured, my performance gets measured by the number of, you know, diverse businesses that I spend with as a procurement officer, or the number of women that I might hire as XYZ manager that has P&L responsibility over said group.
Mm-hmm. And it's that idea of leadership, like culture trickles down from the top, right? So if you want to have something implemented and really want to see it stick, then it's got to be something that your leadership is really trying to figure out a way to make it sticky and applicable to the organization.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like culture is for sure influenced by all stakeholders, but stakeholders always care about doing right by their boss and making sure that they're doing a good job for their manager, whoever that manager is, right? In my case, it's my board of directors. In the case of, you know, a VP of operations, it might be the CEO or the president that's assigned to determine whether or not they get that bonus. And so I think really good leaders empower their managers to create a culture and to foster a culture of inclusivity where people of all sorts aren't afraid of being vulnerable, even making mistakes on the job, imagine, so that you can learn from them and pivot and be able to innovate as a result of, something not necessarily going according to plan. And I think, to Michael's point earlier, what you have when you have a variety of voices in the room is you really do push the envelope to aim higher, because people are thinking about things from a variety of angles based on their lived experience. And in as much as we, in whatever ways we have power, can cultivate thinking about the greater community, then what happens is, through the word of mouth, people look out for you, right? People pay it forward. People feel good about coming to work every day.
And this falls in line with, and it kind of gives me the warm and fuzzies in terms of some of the conversations that we've had with extremely influential leaders like you in our industry, in food service and hospitality. It seems like there's such a wonderful mindset of understanding the impact that you have in your role and kind of advocating those around you, whether that's through, diversifying your suppliers and bringing up the community with you, or installing wellness programs or team building or whatever that is. I just, throughout these podcasts that we've had, the tapings in different conversations, it's just been such a positive reinforcement that, outside looking in, a lot of people see these big organizations as turning a blind eye to things like this. But knowing that these conversations happen and that leaders are making these changes, I think it gives, it reinforces kind of that hope there that working for big corporations doesn't mean to be a negative thing. There's such positive change that can happen from within and affect people on such, profound levels across the country and across the world.
Absolutely. When I think about the buying power that corporations have, even when I think about the buying power of small and medium-sized businesses and how they really fuel, they are the ones that are hiring, right? And so corporations, especially those that report to the street, it's almost as if, with all of the privilege that those in positions of power at these entities have, in some ways, it is your obligation to make sure that you are responsibly acting as a steward for the organizations that you lead, because so many people are impacted when something happens, good or bad. Thousands of people, right? A decision at the top, if not, thoroughly thought through, could have the ramifications of thousands of layoffs even. And so I think that there has to be intentionality around operating, obviously, in the interest of shareholders, but even more importantly, and not just exclusively talking about publicly traded companies, but as leaders of entities with strong buying power, whether private, public, family-owned, you name it, knowing the roles that you play and the lives that are touched on such a macro level, it behooves us all, not just domestically, but globally, for us to just look out for each other. It's not rocket science, right? I even think about all the fancy schools that I've gone to in my life. It's really about leveraging what I learned to affect those that don't have a chance to be in the room, that may never leave their respective state or leave their country. We've just got to look out for each other as human beings.
And I mean that that's kind of a natural transition in the conversation. We've started at this kind of higher level and how important it is for leaders in these companies to, affect this change. But for those that, like you said, may not be at that level, they may never be at that level. How, let's scale the idea down and bring it down to the individual. So how can employees kind of realistically have an impact on corporate decisions that, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, levels above where they make decisions? How do they impact that? How do they show influence when it seems like they can't?
I think honestly, when you see people do good work, shout them out. Let people know, even if it doesn't necessarily benefit you in your role, but we all see it, right? Even if it's the custodian that's helping to, fix the elevator that you always use that has that nice smile, like just use your ability to influence in a way that positively can impact someone else's life. You never know who's listening. You never know who's in the room. And I mean, as I shared with you about my journey to Sodexo Magic, really getting a start 13 years ago, you just never know where people end up. And so the true matter of it is we all have influence. We all have the ability to either seek to understand if we're struggling to understand a concept, or we are uncomfortable or feel curious, but maybe a little bit timid about approaching someone. Step out of your comfort zone. Think about it from the context of how you would want to be treated, and just lean in a little bit. Shout out to Sheryl Sandberg.
And I feel like, one of our earlier podcasts with Mbune, she always talks about, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's so true on a corporate level, on a personal career level, and a personal kind of life choices level. It's every risk makes somebody uncomfortable, but how do you take that next step? How do you affect change? How do you become something that you wanted to be, or get the result that you wanted without making that leap, without taking that risk? And inherently that becomes uncomfortable. And I think that's an important point to think about.
Yeah,
for sure.
So it's always important to expand your comfort zone, to keep pushing the boundaries of it so that you can continue to grow as a person. So,
Go ahead, Danny. No, you got it, Danny.
I was gonna start to thank Selena for her time in this great conversation today, because I think this has been a really positive and impactful podcast, not just for our listeners, but mainly for Mike and I.
It's true.
So you guys have been so much fun.
Thank you.
Could I get to come back, please?
Yes.
I think there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot we just could not touch on because there's only so many hours in the day, but there's so much here that I want to unpack and explore, and I feel like kind of the journey that you've been on personally and professionally opens up the door to a lot of interesting conversations that should be had.
Exactly, that need to be had.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
Well, before we end, we always like to ask our guests this question, and we know it's some of them are like, oh, I think eye roll. But if you could go back in time to that Selena when she's just starting out her career in that professional journey, what is one thing that you would tell her?
Oh, I would tell her, oh gosh, this is so hard.
Well, we don't let you off easy. We don't end on a light note.
We save the best for last.
I would tell her, Selena, don't you worry. It is going to be just fine. You've got this. You have got this. You do not need to go and bawl your eyes out in the stall.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. I shouldn't laugh at that.
Life is going to be okay, and just trust your decision making, because it tends to put you in the right rooms at the right times in the right places. So that's what I would tell her.
wouldn't that be so nice to have, you're sitting there, you're in a park one day or whatever that is. And you know what, someone 30 years older than you that may or may not look like you comes up and they're just like, hey, you did just fine.
You got this.
And you're like, okay, well, that now I can finally get, 6 hours of sleep uninterrupted without waking up and freaking out about something. Maybe that's just me being me, but I love that, because I just feel like everybody needs to hear that. Like, you're going to be okay. You got it. You did well. You're okay.
And it's something that's said with that sincerity and that place of love. And I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Selena, thank you so much for your time today. I think it goes without saying that we'll have a conversation after this and talk about the next episode and what topic that is we explore. But your insights today on how we can, as corporations and as individuals and as employees and as people, impact the community around us and the decisions that we make, and being intentional in things, was a message that we needed to hear. Mm-hmm. And we really appreciate your insight and spreading that message to all of our listeners.
Oh, it is my honor and pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Served by SHFM, your food service hospitality podcast. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed on today's episode are not necessarily those of SHFM or any of its members.